As we enter a new year, in fact the beginning of a new property cycle, there are still lots of mixed messages in the media, leaving many investors and potential home buyers confused. And I hope by the end of today's show, you're going to be a little bit less confused, because I'm going to ask Dr. Andrew Wilson, Australia's leading housing economist, some of the questions you're probably thinking about, so you're going to understand his thoughts on what's going to happen to property this year, what's going to happen to interest rates, are we going to fall into a recession, and a few other great questions that are on the minds of many property investors. But before I do that, we're both going to discuss some lessons that we've learned from 2019 that should make you a better property investor in 2020. And I'm also going to share a mindset moment with you. So lots of Dr. Andrew Wilson in today's show, but I always have fun with my chats because he's got some great insights. Welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
As we enter a new year, in fact, the beginning of a new decade and a new property cycle, it's interesting to look back at 2019 and see what lessons we have learned or we can relearn. So today I'd like to discuss a number of lessons that should help property investors in 2020 by looking back. And who best to discuss this with than Dr. Andrew Wilson, Australia's leading housing economist and chief economist of myhousingmarket.com.au. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, when we look back to last year, I think one of the lessons you should take into account is be careful who you listen to, because if you listen to all the negative Nellies and the property pessimists, you would have missed out on some great opportunities 12 months ago.
I guess it was a classic example, wasn't it, Michael? We certainly had a lot of extreme language, which I guess we should be used to in the housing market because it attracts attention, and that's the general plan, of course, regardless of your credibility. If you can get a cheap headline with a ultra negative or ultra positive grab, then go for it. And we certainly saw that reveal itself over 2018 and into 19. Silly predictions of 40% falls in house prices over 2019 were revealed as completely ridiculous, whereas in fact the reality was we had prices growing by maybe up to 5% over the year rather than a 40% fall. But everybody was on that doom and gloom bandwagon. Didn't really last that long because the market started to turn early in 2019. Buyers came back into the market, and of course once the real drivers of the market, not sentiment, the real driver being lower interest rates and improved economy, and I guess those issues to do with return of the government, meaning there won't be what weren't significant changes to some of those property taxes. The markets were up and running again. And again, it was just a lesson in don't listen to extreme language.
Another lesson is that property investing, more than just home buying, property investing is really a game of finance with some homes thrown in the middle. As you correctly said, market sentiment, consumer sentiment, confidence in your jobs, financial security in the economy makes the big difference for the bulk of buyers who are home buyers. But property investors got stuck over the last couple of years with APRA and the Reserve Bank starting in 2014 and bringing on a downturn, the likes of which we haven't seen in, well, ever really.
That's right, Michael. And I guess in a way, the policymakers also got seduced by some of the extreme policy positions that they felt might be an outcome reflecting on, I guess, past evidence and evidence from overseas housing markets. But again, they were proven to be wrong. And it only really exacerbated that peak of negativity that we did see at the end of 2018 when markets were adjusting, but really the avalanche of negativity really caused buyers and sellers to sit on the sideline. But as you said, it didn't last long because the fundamentals are all that you really should be looking at, and they're issues of basic supply and demand. More people versus how many houses are there for them to live in. And of course, the glue is interest rates.
Well, based on that, the fundamentals of strong population growth and generally the wealth of the nation, in my mind, helps underpin the long-term growth of well-located properties in Australia, but that doesn't mean that all properties are the same. There's a lot of talk about the Australian property market or the Sydney property market, when in fact one of the important lessons for people buying into the market is that no, there's not just one Sydney market. It's based on geography, on the type of property, apartments versus houses, on the demographics, on new home buyers versus established home buyers. There's multiple markets around Australia, Andrew.
That's right, Michael. I do think there are linkages, however, that do particularly tie capital city markets together, but they're not tied together in real time. Some are laggards, some are leaders in terms of how they're performing, and that depends on the local factors such as population growth, the economy, and confidence. And so, but I think that over time, markets do tend to work together to come to the similar price outcomes in terms of their relationship between each other. But it's always difficult to find that point in time when everything is equal, because things are always moving, particularly factors such as interest rates and population.
I think another important lesson we got last year was expect the unexpected. There's always an X factor, sometimes on the upside, like the miracle election win, sometimes on the downside, like the prolonged US-China trade war. You never know what's going to be there, so the best laid plans sometimes fall over.
That's right, Michael, but I still think our housing markets move fundamentally on basic supply and demand issues. They can shift in terms of sentiment in the short term, and that is responses to factors, as you said, external and internal factors. But of course, volatile movements in interest rates can also affect the shorter term outcomes for housing markets. But I do believe its fundamentals are clearly that should be viewed in terms of the prospects of housing markets, and we saw that in 2018 and 19 when the fundamentals kicked in again, under supply basically, and pent-up demand was released. And we saw prices recovering in Melbourne and Sydney particularly.
The couple of things you've said remind me of another important lesson. Don't make 30-year investment or home buying decisions based on the last 30 minutes of news. That's what's been happening. People are getting too excited by what they're reading when, as you say, it's the long-term fundamentals that are going to drive our property markets, and the ups and downs are being driven by emotion, investor sentiment, fear and greed, while the long-term trend is really based on the fundamentals of our supply and demand and population growth.
Well, that's right, Michael. And I think in terms of the future prospects for our housing market, given the cycle will likely be a lot flatter as interest rates will be a lot flatter, I think those issues of fear and greed will start to become less important.
I think you've got more confidence in human nature than I have, because I think there's always going to be people who are going to look for a shortcut, look for a quick way of getting rich, look for the next hotspot, and they're the ones that in the last cycles have been left behind. So that's probably another good lesson to learn as well. The property market isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, is it, Andrew?
No, I think we're going to see the death of the hotspots, Michael, which is, again, a good thing. But the good thing about, the positive thing about our housing market, talking about the prospects of the cycle in relation to the key driver interest rates, is that the real fundamental is we have a very solid banking system, and we can't, as in the US, overborrow or speculate on property because the banks remain quite strict in terms of their lending criteria. In fact, they've become too strict in their lending criteria, which unfortunately was a product of the Royal Commission. And we need to, I guess, unloosen a little bit of those strict lending conditions that are particularly constraining investors.
Well, there's 4 good lessons that we learned or relearned or want to pass on to you for 2020, things that happened in 2019. Thanks for your time, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Michael.
I'm going to be back with Andrew Wilson in just a moment when I ask him some of the common questions left on our websites from listeners to my podcast, from viewers of our Property Insiders video series, and there are probably some things you're thinking about what's going to happen to the property market and the economy. So that's coming up shortly. But I'm first going to have my regular mindset message, and today I'm going to share with you some things I would have liked to know earlier. It's the time of the year when a lot of people write out lots of lists, isn't it? So I've got a list for you of things I would have liked to have known, and I hope you're going to get some motivation, some inspiration, and some lessons from that as well. But just going back to what Andrew Wilson was talking about, the lessons we learned from 2019 in our property markets, this year is going to be very, very different. It's already seeming to be quite different, isn't it? And that's why I'm inviting you as my guest to join me at my National Property Market and Economic Updates that I'm running in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne in March and April. Now, there's normally a $99 charge to come along, but if you use the coupon code podcast on the page propertymarketupdate.com.au. It'll be in the show notes. Use the coupon code podcast at propertymarketupdate.com.au. You can come as a guest and bring a friend, and you'll hear me, Dr. Andrew Wilson, Ken Race, a series of local property experts and some finance experts, talk about how to take advantage of this new property cycle. And who better to learn from than us, who've been around for quite a number of property cycles. We've all been in property, the main speakers have, for over 40 years. That's showing our age, but it's also showing our experience and our perspective. I'd love you to be there as my guest, propertymarketupdate.com.au. The link will be in the show notes. Now, why not have a listen to my mindset moment?
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
It's often around this time of the year that people come up with lists. 18 things I would have liked to know when I was 18, 21 things I wish I was told as a 21-year-old. You know those sort of lists. Well, I'm going to share a list with you today that I would have liked to know earlier in life. But I'm not going to say 18 for 18 or 20 for 20 because it doesn't matter what age you are. I believe I've got some lessons for you today. These are the lessons I would have liked to know when I was younger. And the first lesson I'd like to share with you is commit yourself to making lots of big mistakes, because mistakes teach you important lessons. Of course, the biggest mistake you can make is doing nothing because you're too scared to make a mistake. So don't hesitate. Don't doubt yourself. In life, it's really about getting a chance. It's more about taking a chance. You'll never be 100% sure whether it will work, but you're always going to be 100% sure doing nothing won't work. Most of the time, you just have to give it a go. Remember, I've often said to you that I'm a real success at failure. I've failed so often that I've become successful in all areas of my life, because no matter how things turn out, it's always going to end up the way it should be. Either you succeed or you learn something that doesn't work. So either way, you win. And if it's not okay, remember that beautiful saying in that movie, I think it was the Greatest Marigold Hotel, it'll be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end yet. So remember, if you never act, you'll never know for sure, and you'll be left standing in the same spot forever. The second lesson I would have liked to know earlier in life, and that I taught my children, was some career advice, and telling them not to choose their careers based on other people's ideas, goals or recommendations. I suggested that they don't choose the university courses because they're popular or because they're likely to create more money in the future. I suggested that they remain true to themselves and follow their interests and follow their values and follow their passions, because I wouldn't have liked them to be in a job, a career, a profession, and after a number of years think, what am I doing here? I don't like this. Am I going to be able to do this for the rest of my life? On the other hand, if you catch yourself working hard and loving every minute of it, don't stop, because you're onto something big, because hard work isn't hard when you concentrate on your passions. The next lesson I'd like to give, the life lesson I'd like to share with you, is invest time, energy and money in yourself every day. That's part of why I'm doing these podcasts. I'm giving you opportunity for personal growth and personal development, because when you invest in yourself, you can't lose. And over time, you're going to change the direction of your life. You're the product of what you know. The more time, energy and money you spend acquiring the right sort of knowledge in all areas of life, not just in property investment, and that's why I have a broad range of topics in this podcast, the more you know, the more control you're going to have over your life. So hang around the right people, take courses, listen to podcasts, but be careful who you listen to, and spend time every day educating yourself. I guess following on from that, another lesson would be to explore new ideas and opportunities, and do that often. And natural human fears of failure and embarrassment are sometimes going to stop us from trying new things, though, aren't they? But you must rise above these fears, because your life story is simply the culmination of the many small, unique experiences that you have. And the more unique experiences you have, the more interesting your life's going to be. So seek as many new life experiences as possible, and be sure to share them with people you care about. Because if you don't do that, you're not living. So wealthy people have been found to enjoy their lives more because of the experiences that the money they have can give them. It's not the money that's important, it's life experiences, so enjoy them. Also, maybe I should have said it a bit earlier when we're talking about careers, is when you're sharpening your knowledge, your career focus, your skills, focus on less. Rather than being a little bit good at a lot of things, become an expert at something special. Hard work matters, but not if it's scattered in diverse directions. So my suggestion is you narrow your focus on learning a few career-related skills and master them and become an expert. Another lesson I'd like to share with you is that people aren't mind readers. So tell people what you're thinking. People are never going to know unless you tell them. Whether it's your boss, he doesn't know that you're looking for a promotion or what your mind's thinking, or that girl or the guy that you're interested in but hasn't talked to you and you're too shy to start with them. In life, you have to communicate with others. And often you have to open your mouth and say the first words. You've got to tell people what you're thinking. It's as simple as that. Another lesson that you need to learn early in life is make swift decisions. Take immediate action. When Napoleon Hill wrote his book, Think and Grow Rich, almost a century ago, he said that the people who are the most successful are the action takers. So either you're going to take action and seize new opportunities, or you know what? Somebody else is going to. You can't change anything or make any sort of progress by sitting back and thinking about it. There's a huge difference between knowing how to do something and actually doing it. In this world, you don't get paid for what you know. You get paid for doing something with what you know. Knowledge is basically useless unless you take action. One of the lessons I've learned over the years is the importance of accepting and embracing change. We don't like change as human beings. However good or bad a situation is going to be, it actually is going to change. That's one thing you can count on. So get used to change, embrace change, realise that change happens for a reason. It won't always be easy or obvious at first, but in the end it'll be worth it. Remember in a previous mentorship session I discussed with you the concept that everything happens for a reason. You won't always know what it is straight away, but if you accept that everything happens for a reason, you're going to act better, you're going to perform better, and the reason will become obvious in due course. A lesson I wish I had learned earlier in life is don't worry too much about what other people think about you, because for the most part, what other people think about you or say about you doesn't matter. But when I was young, I let other people's opinions of me influence my decisions, and at times they steered me from ideas and goals that I would have rather pursued. I now realise how foolish a way that was to live, especially when I actually see where those people's opinions got them, and those people are no longer part of my life. Of course, there's sometimes the first impressions are important. If you're doing a job interview, or if you're going out on a first date or things like that. But in general, don't let people's opinions of you stand in your way. What they think and say about you isn't important. What is important is how you feel about yourself. So feel good about yourself. That's one of the other lessons everyone has to know early in the piece. Be comfortable with yourself. I'd also like you to ask lots of questions, because if you ask questions, you're going to learn things. Sometimes in the process of asking a question, the search is more significant than the answers. Answers come from other people, from the internet, from the universe of knowledge, from history, from wisdom. These answers will never surface if you don't ask the right questions. So ask the right questions and you'll get the right answers. A money lesson, I haven't discussed anything much about money at this point yet, but a money lesson you should have early in life is live below your means. You know that, I've said it to you before. Spend less than you earn, save the money and invest it, and over time you're going to build your own cash machine. So it's important to manage your money wisely. Don't spend your money to impress others. Don't live a life trying to fool yourself thinking that material objects are making you wealthy. Don't spend money on your credit card to buy things to impress other people, because that's not your money. You're paying the bank for the privilege of using it. A couple of lessons more. I'd like to remind you that it's important to be respectful of others and make them feel good. Whether it's in life, in business, it's not so much what you say that counts, but it's how you make other people feel that counts. So respect people, whether they're older than you, younger than you, and everybody in between. There should be, in our country, no boundaries, no classes, no distinction, has nothing to do with what job they've got, how much they earn. Everyone in this world is valuable. Now, the lesson I'd like to share with you is be really good at what you do, excel at what you do. There's no point in doing something if you're not going to do it right and you're not going to do it well. So don't half do things. Develop a reputation for yourself, a reputation of consistent excellence. And the last lesson I'd like to share with you today is be who you were born to be. Follow your heart. Be who you were born to be. Some of us were born to be musicians, to communicate that way. Some of us were born to be poets or artists. Others were born to be entrepreneurs, to create, to grow wealth, where others couldn't see the opportunity of this to happen. Regardless of what you decide to do in your lifetime, you better feel it in every fibre of your being. You better be born to do it. Don't waste your time fulfilling somebody else's dreams and desires. And above all, laugh when you can. Apologise when you should. Let go of those things that you can't change. Over my 66 years, yes, I had my 66th birthday a while ago, I've realised that life is short, but amazing. Enjoy the ride, otherwise you won't enjoy the destination. While our property markets are entering a new property cycle, currently there are lots of mixed messages in the media, some positive, and there are still lots of negative messages. And this has led to many viewers of our regular Property Insider videos and listeners to our podcast leaving questions. They're asking for clarification. So in my chat with Dr. Andrew Wilson today, I'm going to ask him to answer some of your questions, which, if you're interested in property, are likely to help give you some clarity for what's ahead. Well, we're in a new year and there's lots of people still wondering what's happening to our Australian economy. Are we going to fall into a recession because everyone's suggesting it's slowing down and we're in trouble?
Well, it's interesting, Michael. 2019 was a year where the Reserve Bank, I guess, finally realised that things weren't as rosy as they had expected. We did see the labour market deteriorate, unemployment rising, although jobs generally were still growing. But GDP was down, inflation still too low, and incomes growth also still too low. Issues continue over consumption. The domestic economy continued to weaken in terms of spending patterns, retail sales. And it was really only the mining sector and government spending that kept our economy ticking over and with its head above water. However, it's interesting, Michael, I think by the time we got to the end of the year, actually things started to look a little bit better. We did have some poor labour market data over September, where we actually saw the unemployment rate continue to increase, but we also saw jobs falling for the first time in some time. But the latest data in terms of the labour market actually showed a fall in the unemployment rate and also jobs starting to grow again, although most of the jobs growth has been in part-time work. But when we look at the big picture, we've seen some early signs of an improvement in the global economy, Michael. The US Federal Reserve has indicated that it's unlikely to change interest rates in 2020, but they're sounding a lot more confident about the prospects of the US economy, which has very low unemployment, a reasonable GDP growth, and incomes are starting to grow in the US. And also the Eurozone is moving away. A number of economies are moving away from negative interest rate positions and have stated that they're going to try to move into a positive interest rate environment gradually. And of course, we have the Brexit issue now behind us in terms of the certainty with the landslide victory of the Tory party in the UK, which will deliver Brexit. So I think a lot of that uncertainty is now starting to at least ease.
So we've got some clarity on Brexit, and it looks like the US and China may also be coming to some agreement. But of course, there's that impeachment story that's happening in the United States. But coming back to Australia, we know the Reserve Bank is hell-bent on increasing wages growth, lowering unemployment, getting more people into jobs. What do you think is going to happen to interest rates this year?
Certainly, it's no surprise, and it's been indicated quite clearly by the Reserve Bank that rates would be likely to be cut again, perhaps twice, given issues with the economy. We've looked with better economic data internationally and some improvement with the end of year data that was published, that we may see the Reserve Bank now more inclined to keep their powder dry, perhaps for a month or two. Certainly the bias for rates is still down, and still down early in the year rather than later. But perhaps the Reserve Bank's got something to think about in terms of holding interest rates for a month or two longer. And I think that will depend on the end of year data that's published in February and March.
Property markets finished very strongly in 2019. It was a year of two halves. Do you feel the strength's going to continue in 2020?
Well, the upside certainly continued through to the end of the year, Michael. There was no sign of auction markets easing. Clearance rates remained at very high levels over the final weekends of the year. High clearance rates from what were very high volumes for December indicate that there's plenty of confidence in the marketplace from buyers and sellers, and that will continue into 2020. There's other issues that will fuel it. We have the first home buyer deposit scheme comes into force on the 1st of January. That will bring thousands of first home buyers potentially into the marketplace, and certainly the bias on lower interest rates is a positive for the market. And there's plenty of incentive to get into the market with prices rising quickly as they had at the end of the year, for that fear of missing out energy, that particularly for first home buyers, but generally for most buyers. The missing link are investors, and if investors come into the market in higher numbers, which is likely, that will only fuel stronger prices growth.
Well, I know investors are keen to get into the market, but their challenge at the moment is getting finance, isn't it?
Well, it is, Michael. There's a sort of a conundrum out there. Some commentators are suggesting that it's lack of confidence from investors that's keeping investor activity low, but others are saying no, it's a lack of access to finance, that investors are keen to get into the market, but they can't because they're still restricted by these risk-averse policies directed to investors from the banks. I'm not sure why investors would be hesitant to get into a marketplace where prices are growing at, according to some models, at record levels.
And the opportunity to get into a market at the beginning of a new cycle doesn't happen very often in one's lifetime. I guess the answer is you've got to recognise it. And that's partly related to the mixed messages out there, the worries about the off-the-plan market, the structural issues, the recession, maybe keeping a job. But our experience at Metropole is investors are very keen to take advantage of opportunities, but the challenge is with finance. So we're moving into a new year. What do you think are going to be the major influences on our property markets this year?
Well, positive confidence is certainly that will drive the market through the year, just as negative confidence drove the market at the beginning of 2019. It's certainly got a head of steam up at the moment, most markets, particularly Melbourne and Sydney. We shouldn't be generalising because smaller markets are still just moving. Some signs that Brisbane and Adelaide are starting to pick up, but nowhere near the energy that Melbourne and Sydney have. So confidence is a positive factor, Michael, and pent-up demand, I guess, is still being released in Melbourne and Sydney, given prices, although growing strongly, still remain below where they were at their peaks in 2017. So that does tell us that there's upside to prices. And of course, as we've discussed regarding interest rates, which are certainly more likely to fall over the first half of the year, that's another positive in terms of improving affordability and working its way into confidence. And as I said, some improvement in the economy, very, very early signs to that, will take that out of the focus in the shorter term.
And of course, the old supply-demand ratio is going to kick in too, as there's very little new supply coming into the market. But we still keep growing. The latest Australian Bureau of Statistics figures showed we added about 380,000 people, much the same as the year before, but we're not building enough, or we're not building the right sort of dwellings for them, are we?
Absolutely right, Michael. This is a real issue that will unfold itself over the next 2 years. We're just going to run out of housing. And the building approval data is really sobering. It's virtually collapsed in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane in terms of apartments, and just takes time, regardless of how strong demand is, for supply to match it. And this is going to create shortages of housing, and it's going to produce other issues in terms of lack of job opportunities in the building sector. And this again gets back to the issue of trying to manipulate markets, which the financial regulator did through 2014 and up to 2018. And what's resulted in that, of course, is lack of new supply coming through as a direct consequence of those particular policies. And that will take some time to right itself, Michael, and it's only going to mean upward pressure on prices and rents.
Well, another interesting year ahead of us. There are some headwinds, as we said, but there's lots of positive signs. So I look forward to having a chat with you each week, Andrew, as we unpack what's happening in our property markets. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Michael.
As we near the end of another show, I'd like to thank you for listening. And if you got some benefit from this, I'd like you to help me in my quest to educate as many property investors, entrepreneurs, business people as possible. I want to help them understand how to become more successful. And I do it through my podcasts, I do it through my blogs, I do it through my videos. If you got some benefit, tell somebody about this. If you know somebody else who'd like to make a success of their lives, particularly through property, pass it on. There's a share button at the bottom of every podcast app. And of course, you can keep up to date with me in between the twice weekly podcasts by going to Property Update and getting my regular daily newsletter, or on social media, just look for Michael Yardney. And in particular, over the last 6-9 months, I've been spending a lot more time on Instagram. I'd like to get to know more about you. And if you'd like to tell the world what you think about the show, as a couple of podcast reviews I'm about to read out have done, I always say thank you to people who've gone to the trouble of doing that by gifting them one of my books. So if this is you who's being read out, please email me, michael@metropole.com.au, and I'd love to gift you one of my books. And if you leave your review when I read it out, I'll do the same. So Maddie Island left a review saying, a wealth of knowledge. This podcast has such a wealth of knowledge for everything to do with investing, developing, manufacturing growth, and even the simple things like the habits of successful and rich. Hey, Maddie, they're not the simple things. They're the important things. I stream this every day and even sent it to my home loan manager, who also finds it amazing. Whether you're already an investor or looking to start, like I am, this podcast's all you need. Let Michael and his credible team expand your investing horizons. So thank you for that one. Now, also, there was another one from Matt Napier who said, amazing for new investors. Michael's podcasts are really informative, greatly breaking down important topics that are really easy to understand to those new to property investing. Also provides mental insights. Well, that's an interesting way of saying it, but yes, it is, because the psychology of success is very, very important in my mind. Anyway, Matt went on to say, really enjoyed the story about feeding the wolves. Love the podcast each week. Thank you very much, Matt. And I look forward to being with you again twice a week on the Michael Yardney podcast. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?